Somewhere above your head right now, a crow might already know your face. It might remember exactly how you walk, what you were wearing the last time you passed by, and whether you are someone worth trusting or someone worth avoiding. And by the end of this video, you will understand why scientists who spent years recording crow calls and who recently started feeding those recordings into artificial intelligence are saying something that sounds almost impossible. These birds may be running a real communication system, one far more organized than anyone expected. So stick around, because everything in this video comes from real published research and real ongoing scientific projects, not internet rumors dressed up to sound scary. Let's start with the obvious question. Why crows? Out of every bird on the planet, why did scientists pick this one to study so closely? The answer is simple once you actually watch how crows live. They do not just exist near humans, they study us. Step outside almost anywhere in the world, in a city, a small town, a quiet countryside road, and there's a good chance a crow is perched somewhere nearby, watching. Crows consistently choose high spots, rooftops, power lines, the tops of trees, spots that give them a wide, clear view of everything happening below. That is not an accident. It is a survival habit built over thousands of years, and it happens to make crows extremely good at quietly observing the humans living underneath them. And they do not forget what they see. This is not exaggeration. It is one of the most well-documented facts in bird research. Crows recognize individual human faces, and they remember them for years. The most famous proof of this comes from a scientist named John Marsluff, who has been studying crows at the University of Washington for decades. In 2006, he and his team ran an experiment that changed how people think about crow memory. Marsluff did not want to become a permanent target of angry crows himself, so he wore a rubber caveman mask while briefly catching and tagging a small group of wild crows before releasing them completely unharmed. The crows were furious in the moment, screaming, diving, and chasing him off. Here is where it gets interesting. Weeks and months later, Marsluff walked through the same area wearing a completely different ordinary mask. Nothing happened. No reaction at all. But the second he put the original caveman mask back on, the crows exploded into the same aggressive response, screaming and dive-bombing him all over again. That alone would be impressive. But the real twist is what happened over the following years. The number of crows reacting to that mask kept growing. It started with around 7 birds that had actually been present during the original tagging. Within a few years, that number climbed past 20. Eventually, it passed 40. Many of these newer crows had not even been alive when the original event happened. They had never personally seen Marsluff or been caught by him, and yet they still recognized the mask as a threat and joined the attack. The only real explanation is that the information spread. Older crows appear to have taught younger crows, and possibly other crows nearby, that this specific face meant danger. Marsluff's team repeated the test year after year, and the pattern held up every single time, which ruled out the idea that it was some kind of fluke. Even 5 years later, brand new crows that had never met Marsluff still reacted to that exact mask. In practical terms, if you have ever mistreated a crow in an area where crows live long-term, there is a real chance that memory did not disappear when the moment ended. It may have been passed along to birds you have never even seen. Now, memory and recognition are one thing, but scientists have also found that crows are seriously intelligent problem solvers, and this is where things start to sound more like science fiction than biology. Take the New Caledonian crow, a species found on islands in the South Pacific, that researchers sometimes call the engineers of the bird world. These crows do not just pick up random sticks. They build actual tools. Using the leaves of a plant called pandanus, they cut a specific pattern of notches, then tear the leaf into a stepped, hook-shaped tool that they use to pull insects and larvae out of tree bark and crevices. Researchers have watched younger crows observe older crows making these tools, which suggests the exact technique is being passed down socially, almost like a skill being taught, rather than something each bird figures out completely on its own from instinct. Then there is the famous water test, based on an old fable where a thirsty crow dropped stones into a jug to raise the water level and reach a drink. Scientists actually built a real version of this test. They set up a narrow tube partly filled with water, with a small floating treat sitting just out of reach near the top. Next to the tube, they placed a pile of heavy stones and a pile of light foam pieces. If crows were just acting on instinct or randomly grabbing whatever was nearby, they should have used both types of objects equally. Instead, crow after crow ignored the foam completely and picked up the heavy stones, dropping them into the tube one at a time, until the water rose high enough to reach the food. This experiment has been repeated by multiple research teams around the world with consistent results, and it strongly suggests these birds understand basic cause and effect, not just trial and error. In a related test, researchers put food inside a box that could only be opened by pressing a small button, one too small and awkward to press with a beak or claw directly. When crows were given a stick, Several of them figured out how to use it to press the button and get the reward, even though nothing about that setup exists naturally in the wild. These are not instincts baked in by evolution. These are artificial puzzles invented purely to test flexible thinking, and the crows worked through them anyway. All of this raises an obvious question. How does a bird with a brain roughly the size of a walnut pull off something like this? For a long time, scientists assumed advanced thinking required a brain structure called the cerebral cortex, the part responsible for planning and reasoning in mammals, including humans. Birds do not have a cerebral cortex at all, which led researchers for decades to assume they simply were not capable of deep thought. That assumption turned out to be wrong. Bird brains contain a completely different structure called the pallium, and under a microscope, it turns out to be packed with an extremely high density of neurons, allowing for fast, efficient processing despite the brain's small physical size. Because of discoveries like this, some scientists now refer to crows and their relatives as feathered apes, since their problem-solving abilities increasingly resemble what we see in primates. So we have birds that remember individual human faces for years, teach that information to crows who are not even there, build tools, understand basic physics well enough to pass an intelligence test designed for children, and run all of that through a brain built completely differently from ours. Naturally, the next question scientists wanted to answer was simple. If crows can do all of this, what exactly are they saying to each other? This is where things get genuinely exciting and genuinely current, because this research is happening right now, not decades ago. In northern Spain, two scientists named Vittorio Baglione and Daniela Canestrari have spent years studying a population of carrion crows that do something unusual for birds. They breed cooperatively. Entire extended families work together to raise chicks and defend the nest, with more than just the two parents involved. Researchers have understood for a while why crows do this. What they did not understand was how the birds coordinate it all, how they organize themselves, share information, and work as a team. To figure that out, the team set up audio recorders and small tracking devices called biologgers directly on wild crows in the field. Each recorder captured 6 or 7 straight days of nonstop crow sound. And very quickly, the researchers ran into a problem nobody expects to have in wildlife biology. They had too much data. Days and days of recordings, far more than any human team could realistically sit down and analyze call by call. That is where artificial intelligence came in. Since 2024, the Spanish researchers have been working with an organization called the Earth Species Project, a nonprofit based in the United States that specializes in building AI systems, specifically to help scientists study animal communication. Instead of a small team of humans listening to every recording by hand, the AI processes enormous amounts of audio at once, picking out patterns, sorting different call types, and helping build what researchers describe as a growing catalog of distinct crow vocalizations. The Earth Species Project has also built more general audio language models designed to work across many species, not just crows, and they are applying similar tools to study how whales communicate underwater and how ocean noise pollution affects that communication. One detail that came out of the Spanish research is genuinely surprising once you think about it. A large portion of crow communication turns out to be soft, quiet, low-volume sounds, rather than the loud caws most people associate with crows. That suggests a lot of crow conversation may be happening at close range, bird to bird, rather than broadcast loudly across a whole territory. It is a small detail, but it reshapes the picture. Instead of crows constantly shouting information across the landscape, much of their communication may look more like quiet, private conversation between family members standing close together. The scientists are not stopping at sound either. Their long-term goal is to build what they call a semantic map, a system that combines the audio recordings with video footage and movement data from those biologgers, so they can eventually connect specific calls to specific actions in specific situations. In other words, not just recognizing that a sound exists, but understanding what it actually means and when it gets used. This work is still ongoing. Nobody has published a finished crow dictionary. But the direction of the research is genuinely remarkable. Real scientists, real recording equipment, real AI tools, working together to try to answer a question people have wondered about for centuries. What exactly are crows saying to each other? Alongside language and coordination, crows also seem to run something close to a basic social structure of their own, and some of it looks eerily familiar. When a crow dies, nearby crows often do not simply scatter. They gather around the area, perch nearby, and produce a specific kind of vocalization directed at the situation. For a long time, people assumed this looked like grief. More recent interpretations lean towards something a little more practical, almost like the surviving birds are gathering information, taking note of how the death happened, whether it involved a predator, a vehicle, or some other danger, so they can adjust their own behavior going forward. Whether or not you want to call that mourning, it is clearly not random noise. It is a consistent, repeated behavior tied to a specific kind of event. Crows also appear to enforce a rough version of social order within their own groups. If one crow consistently steals food from a weaker crow or behaves aggressively toward the rest of the group, other crows have been observed ganging up on that individual, loudly scolding it, pecking at it, and sometimes physically driving it away. And in a pattern that shows up again and again in casual observation in some documented cases, people who consistently feed local crows sometimes find small objects left behind in return. Shiny bits of glass, small pebbles, the occasional coin. Nobody is claiming this is a deliberate trade in the way humans think about trading. But the pattern is consistent enough that many researchers see it as crows tracking who is friendly and who is not, and responding differently to each group over time. The tracking of who is friendly and who is not seems to extend directly into how crows treat different people. A person who regularly feeds a group of crows tends to get a calmer, quieter reaction from them. A person who has previously thrown something at a crow or acted aggressively tends to get loud, sharp alarm calls the moment they show up again. This lines up exactly with what the Marslow mask experiments already proved. Crows are not treating every human as an identical, faceless stranger. They appear to be sorting people into categories based on past behavior and adjusting their own behavior accordingly. There is also real evidence that crow communication is not identical everywhere. Populations in different regions appear to develop their own local variations in their calls, similar in a loose sense to how humans develop different accents depending on where they grow up. And there is some evidence that certain calls, especially ones tied to a new kind of danger, can spread from one crow population to another over time, passed on the way information moves through any social network, one bird teaching or influencing the next, gradually spreading outward. Now here's the honest, important part of this story. As exciting as all of this is, we are not at the point where scientists have cracked a full crow language the way you might crack a foreign human language. The AI tools being used right now are mainly built to sort, cluster, and categorize huge amounts of crow audio into meaningful groups, essentially organizing the raw material so human researchers can study it properly. That is already a massive step forward, because before AI, teams simply did not have the time or resources to listen to and label thousands of hours of recordings by hand. But turning that sorted data into an actual understanding of specific meanings, what amounts to true translation, is still a work in progress. Researchers describe this as an early and ongoing project, not a finished discovery. It's also worth being clear about something else. You may have come across videos or articles online claiming AI has already found crows assigning specific humans unique names, holding secret planning meetings before people arrive, or even changing their entire communication system because they supposedly caught on to being recorded. Those specific claims are not backed by any published, peer-reviewed research. They make for dramatic storytelling, but they go far beyond what any actual study has shown. The real science is already remarkable enough without needing to invent any of that. What we do know, backed by real, repeatable research, is genuinely wild if you sit with it for a second. Crows recognize individual human faces and hold onto that memory for years. They appear to pass warnings about specific people to other crows who were never present for the original event. They build and use tools, understand basic physical concepts like water displacement well enough to solve a puzzle designed to test reasoning. And their brains, despite looking nothing like ours, run on a structure so densely packed with neurons that some scientists now compare their intelligence to that of primates. Right now, in Spain, scientists are using AI, built specifically for this purpose, to sort through mountains of real crow audio recorded directly from the wild, working toward a genuine understanding of how an entire species coordinates, cooperates, and possibly communicates specific information to each other. So the next time you walk past a crow sitting quietly on a fence, a power line, or the branch of a tree, it is worth remembering what the actual science says. It may already recognize you. It may remember you the next time you pass by. And somewhere in a research lab right now, a team of scientists and a piece of AI software are working through the exact same question you might be asking yourself in this moment. What is that bird actually trying to say? There's another layer to this story that most people never hear about, and it has to do with just how unusual crows are compared to almost every other bird on the planet. Crows belong to a family of birds called Corvids, which also includes ravens, magpies, and jays. Scientists studying animal intelligence keep coming back to this family again and again because corvids keep passing tests that most other animals fail. Magpies, close cousins of crows, are among the very few animals outside of mammals that have passed a version of the mirror test, a classic experiment where researchers place a small mark somewhere the animal cannot normally see, like on its own chest, and then check whether the animal notices the mark in a mirror and tries to investigate it on its own body, rather than treating the reflection as another animal. Passing that test is generally treated as a sign of some level of self-awareness. For decades, only a small handful of species, mostly great apes, elephants, and dolphins, were known to pass it. Magpies passing it as well forced a lot of researchers to rethink what kind of brain is actually required for that ability. Crows themselves show a similar pattern of surprising behavior in how they play. Researchers and casual observers alike have filmed crows sliding down snowy rooftops on small objects like plastic lids, seemingly just for fun, then walking back up and doing it again. Wild crows have also been observed dropping nuts onto roads, specifically at intersections with traffic lights, waiting for cars to crush the shells, and then walking out to collect the food once the light turns red and traffic stops. Nobody trained them to do this. It is something crow populations appear to have worked out on their own, adapting a completely human piece of infrastructure, a traffic signal, into a tool for getting food safely. That kind of behavior does not come from instinct passed down through genetics. It comes from individual crows figuring something out, and other crows nearby picking up the same trick. Going back to the tool use in New Caledonian crows for a moment, because it is worth sitting with just how sophisticated it actually is. The hooked tools these birds make out of pandanus leaves are not identical from one bird to the next, or even one region to the next. Researchers studying different crow populations across the islands have found distinct regional styles in how the tools are shaped, some wider, some narrower, some with more hook curvature than others. That kind of regional variation in a manufactured tool is the same basic pattern anthropologists look for when tracing cultural traditions in early human toolmaking. It suggests these are not fixed instinctive designs. They are learned techniques, refined and passed down within specific crow communities with enough consistency to create recognizable local styles. Now let's go back to the Earth Species Project, because their work extends well beyond crows, and it helps explain why so many scientists are optimistic about where this kind of research is heading. The organization has built general-purpose audio-language models, systems trained to find structure in animal sound, the same broad way large language models find structure in human text, except applied to recordings of whale clicks, chimpanzee calls, and bird vocalizations instead of written words. Their tools are being used to study sperm whale communication, examining whether the rhythmic clicking patterns whales use to find each other underwater carry more structure than previously assumed. The same organization is separately looking at how noise pollution from ships and industrial activity in the ocean disrupts whale communication, which has real conservation consequences, since whales that cannot hear each other clearly may struggle to coordinate, find mates, or warn each other of danger. That conservation angle matters for the crow research too. Understanding how crows communicate is not just an academic curiosity. Vittorio Baglioni and Daniela Canestrari, the two researchers leading the Spanish Crow Project, have spent decades studying why carrion crows in that region breed cooperatively, with extended families, working together to raise chicks rather than just a single breeding pair handling everything alone. That cooperative structure is actually rare among birds worldwide, and understanding exactly how it is coordinated, who decides what, how information about danger or food gets shared within the family group, could tell researchers a lot about how complex social cooperation evolves in animals generally, not just in crows. The technical side of the Spanish project is worth explaining a little further too, because it shows how much has changed in just the last couple of years. Before working with the Earth Species Project, Baglione and Canestrari's team was collecting audio the traditional way, placing recorders in the field and manually reviewing what came back. Once they started using tracking devices called biologgers, small units attached to individual wild crows that record both sound and movement, the amount of raw data ballooned far beyond what any human team could process by listening alone. Each recorder captured 6 to 7 full days of continuous audio per bird. Multiply that across many birds over multiple field seasons, and you end up with an amount of recorded sound that would take a research team years to sort through by hand. Feeding that audio into AI models built specifically to detect and cluster different call types is what makes analyzing a dataset that size actually realistic within a normal research timeline. One particularly interesting early finding from that work is worth repeating because it quietly changes the picture most people have of crow communication. Most people assume crows mainly communicate through loud caws, the kind of call you can hear from far across a park or a street. But the Spanish research has found that a large share of actual crow vocalizations are soft, low-volume sounds, closer to murmurs than shouts. That suggests a significant part of crow conversation may happen at close range, between family members standing near each other, rather than being broadcast loudly across a whole territory. If that holds up as researchers gather more data, it means a lot of what crows are actually saying to each other might be happening quietly, right next to each other, essentially invisible to anyone not standing close enough to hear it, which is exactly the kind of detail that never would have shown up without dedicated recording equipment and AI-assisted analysis working together. Put all of these pieces side by side and a fairly clear picture starts to form, even without any exaggeration. Crows recognize individual human faces and remember them for years. That memory appears to spread to other crows, including ones that were not present for the original event. Crows and their Corvid relatives build tools, adapt human infrastructure like traffic lights for their own benefit, pass a self-recognition test that very few non-mammal species have ever passed, and run all of this through a brain that looks nothing like a human brain on the outside, but is packed with an extraordinary density of neurons on the inside. And right now, in real ongoing research projects in Spain and elsewhere, scientists are using purpose-built AI tools to sort through mountains of real recorded crow sound, working step by step toward genuinely understanding how these birds talk to each other and coordinate as a group. None of that requires inventing secret human naming systems or imagined encryption theories to be interesting. The real, documented, peer-reviewed version of this story is already strange enough to make you look twice at the next crow you see sitting quietly on a fence or power line. It may already know your face. It may remember the last time you walked past. And somewhere out there, a team of actual scientists, working with actual AI tools, is trying to answer the exact same question you might be asking yourself right now. What is that bird really trying to say? If stories like this genuinely interest you, stick around, because there is a lot more real research on animal intelligence still to come.